Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how the graph schema works. My name is Kristen Janko, and I'm the Manager of Marketing and Sales at Marketing Evolution. Before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's session. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. At the end of the presentation, we will do a Q&A session and take as many questions as we have time for. You can also use the chat box to let us know if you would like a private discussion on this topic or would like us to bring this webinar to your company for a lunch and learn. Or you can email us at marketing@marketingevolution.com. A recorded version of this presentation, as well as the presentation slides, will be emailed to each of you as a link after the webinar. Hosting today's webinar is Marketing Evolution. Marketing Evolution is the leading provider of marketing technology solutions that optimizes marketing ROI at the individual customer level across all media in real time. We have a wide umbrella of clients in retail, entertainment, financial, telecommunications, auto, pharma, and CPG. All of our clients have a big media presence and are doing marketing through all the different channels, both online and offline. These companies turn to us to measure their ROI and unlock value by figuring how to adjust message mix, targeting, and media mix. We moved to a SaaS platform a couple of years ago, which has resulted in 100% customer retention for the 50-plus brands we work with today. We ran $3 billion through the platform last year alone, which gives us a good sample size. And as Marketing Evolution gives recommendations and adjustments, we believe we have enough data collected over time that could help fuel those recommendations. Okay, now let's get started. Presenting today's content is Rex Briggs, founder and CEO of Marketing Evolution. Rex has been helping Fortune 500 marketers improve marketing ROI by applying analytics for more than 2 decades. Rex is a leading expert in unlocking marketing ROI profits through measurement. He is credited with pioneering many digital measurement techniques, including post-click analysis, attribution modeling, online advertising effectiveness, cross-media measurement, social media effectiveness, as well as the integration of marketing mix modeling with attitudinal measurement. Today, he is sharing how the graph schema works. Over to you, Rex.
Thank you. So I'm going to cover off 6 items today. First of all, why spend time on this topic? Secondly, what you need to know about the graph schema. Third, how marketers should really use the graph schema. I'll give a case study, number 4, and 5 is what you need to be asking partners and vendors. And finally, I'll conclude with some resources beyond this webinar. So just to go back to why spend time on this topic, really when certainly I started marketing and studied it in school, data was expensive, data sets were small, and oftentimes we would have very spreadsheets and tables of data that we had the same data on every single person. It made it pretty easy to create a chart like what you see here, a correspondence chart where, for example, if you want to look at 2 variables where you might want to go for a holiday if you're based in the U.S. and you're looking at distance as a dimension and how culturally similar or different locations were. Those would be 2 dimensions that you could graphically show here. But what's changed since, I remember taking a program that was developed by Wharton called MarkStrat, where we'd use perceptual maps to think about how you go about marketing. And when I began my career at Yankelovich Partners, we were using these same perceptual maps to help brands position themselves and so forth, or to do segmentations and so on. And what's really changed recently, and why I think this is an important topic to discuss, is that data began to multiply. Wired did this cover story on the new you, which were all represented by data. And they covered a lot of some of this early work that I and some others were working on 20 years ago. And I remember the first time that I saw this explosion of data and the beginnings of a completely different structure than anything that I had learned in school or had applied in business to that point. And it came in the form of a music recommendation. These folks from Boston came out and visited us in Wired's office, and they had worked at DEC and working on this thing called Ringo, which some of you might know as Firefly later on. And it was a music recommendation. And the basic problem they were trying to solve is that if you like music, how do you share that digitally and try to discover new music that you might also like? And of course, we all are familiar with Spotify and Pandora today, but really you can trace this back 20 years ago to this paper called Social Information Filtering: Algorithms for Automating Word of Mouth. And what they were looking at was this sparse matrix problem, which is that many of us are listening to different kinds of music and we won't all be listening to the same things. And so the typical spreadsheet structure where you had data filling in every single cell, every column and row had the same information, that wasn't going to play in this world. What came out of it, though, was a new types of math and collaborative filtering that you looked at people and every single dimension and type of music that you looked at as a different dimension. And if you think about this if you close your eyes for a moment and think about multidimensional space and think about that each of those different dimensions can be a dot, and the dot product distance from you and your closest neighbor across all those different dimensions describes how similar or different you are, at least in your music tastes. So I was captivated by that idea and that concept, and I was struggling with all this new data coming in 1995 in log files from digital data. And so I said, I wonder if we can apply this to the fact that people are surfing and looking at very different web pages to try to find underlying common insights about what type of websites we could recommend to them. June Cohen, who some of you might know from TED, she runs the events over there now, but 20 years ago, she and I were colleagues, and she was writing about cool websites to surf as a way of discovering. We implemented this as a way of getting people to score what they liked and didn't like, and we're making website recommendations based in the same way that music recommendations were coming up. We applied that to marketing. We had an email newsletter, and we looked at the people's web surfing behaviors and applied neural networking algorithms and analysis to it, and we could detect whether you were more interested in entertainment or more interested in news. And if, depending on the time of day you came in, we could tell whether your interest in news was because you wanted to be the first to know or because you were afraid of being last to know. And we could talk to you differently based upon that. We worked with a colleague of mine, Bruce McAvoy, over at a company called Personify, or Affinicast, I guess is what they're called at the time, on applying canonical correlations and other data techniques to the website personalization. And by 97, we were personalizing the homepage of Wired based upon that data that was sitting behind. And we could predict how valuable you'd be as a customer in different types of treatments and measure whether or not ad exposure would lessen that value or not. And that was really the beginnings of using this new structure to the data and information. And what really emerged out of it from other companies doing parallel work and probably doing much more advanced work than I was personally doing was something called the graph schema. And this was most popularly applied at Facebook and LinkedIn, and they really have taken it to another level. This idea of the graph schema is, as I shift into the second topic, what you need to know about the graph schema is you should think of it as an organizing system that can now attach just about any kind of data and information fact. Even if we don't have the same information on the same people, we can find the commonality. It's incredibly flexible, and it's very easy to add new information and data to it. And it has led to a whole set of new analytic tools for graph analysis that has made it a heck of a lot easier than when I was trying to work with this stuff 20 years ago. So why it's important to you, and the reason why we're doing this education series today on it, obviously we want to help any of you that are our customers or have been our customers in the past and are our friends, colleagues, and so forth to get your arms around this. And of course, we want to be a strong partner for you going forward in the future. And we look at this and say, this is going to be the dominant organizing principle for really all the customer data going forward for the majority of companies out there. And the second thing is, because it's such an important organizing principle already in social media, there are specific metadata that you feed into the graphs that make it easier to discover the patterns. If you go back to the music example, it was very important to have a common catalog to call the song by the same name so that you could make that association and connection. So you think about the metadata that maybe also that Pandora and others began to add on to it. Say, well, maybe it's more than just the song. Maybe it's who the artist is, or who wrote the song, or what instruments are played on it, and so forth. That metadata that can now begin to be attached to it, looking at the tempo and all kinds of dimensions, those might help us discover more patterns to it. So when you begin to think about the graph schema, the reason why we think it's important and what you need to know about it is that we know that using this graph schema can effectively deliver bottom line financial benefits because it's such a powerful way of connecting and organizing information. So here, in terms of what you need to know about it, one way of thinking about it is to think about it as a plug and play with lots of different data. As long as you can connect it to a common node. And the music example before it was the song, but increasingly when we think about customer data, we think of it as being the customer, the person. You'll hear marketing evolution described oftentimes as person-centric analysis, and it's because the adoption of this graph schema and connecting all that data back at a person level. So for example, in this person we can connect attitudinal, geographic, and sales data, even though those come from different data sources, to find common patterns. So we have several different proprietary data sources, and we're combining that oftentimes with other data sources that are not proprietary or that are open. The two different ways that you'll hear data being connected are deterministic and probabilistic. Deterministic is a one-for-one connection. If you have sales data, somebody bought something, then that connection is back to that person directly. Probabilistic is where you might have a connection, but you're going to have to make an estimate on how that data connects back to that person. And that estimate won't be perfect, but it hopefully should be pretty good. A good example of that is that television data is delivered to a set-top box at a household level. Multiple people live in that house. We know deterministically it was delivered to the house, but probabilistically we then make the leap to say, well, who do we think was watching ESPN during these hours of this time, to make that connection back to a person. Oftentimes what we're doing on probabilistic is we're taking a data for a known subset of the population, and then we're creating a classification model to then create the probabilities for everybody else and all the variables that would be important in making that leap, that connection. And then we usually have a holdout group so that we can validate how accurate that classification model was. And that's what you oftentimes want to see in a probabilistic system. The other thing to keep in mind when thinking about this data is that not all data is complete data. So mind the gap and be aware of where those gaps exist. And on the other hand, make sure that you don't let perfect get in the way of progress. On this point, I'll illustrate this with some of our data, but the don't let perfect get in the way of progress is that there is so much value that can be had from combining this data and information, getting a more holistic view of the consumer, managing the experience for the consumer across different devices and touch points, that even though we recognize that this data is not perfect and the probabilistic matches will never be, won't be 100%, and even some of the deterministic data, sometimes we look at and say, well, it might not be showing the complete picture. There's so much upside value out of it today that I do think that this is a race to see who can harness more of this information faster, and there's a huge competitive advantage. So let me illustrate an example of the graph schema, and I'll use myself and my own data as an example. So we can connect in lots of different data, my purchases, where I live, media data, geolocation from some of my different devices, brand perceptions, etc. And I'll give you, this is a actual view of the data that came off of my iPad mini. Now, interestingly, back to that point about not all data is perfect, this is one device. I also have an Apple iPhone, and I have a Samsung phone for some of the VR stuff we play around with at my computer. There's other sensors that are giving geolocation information. But the iPad's view overstates the amount of time I spend in New York because I'm far more likely to be using it in a meeting. I'm far more likely to be looking up things on Yelp or mapping and so forth, which is kicking off the GPS data and information. But even within that data, looking at where, what those locations are and where I'm spending the night, it's pretty clear that I'm at hotels in these different areas and that where I live is in 89511. Now, within that data, we can connect into, this is a set of one of over 200 different data sets that we tap into. This data set gives a probabilistic estimate of the type of person I am. And there's a 39% probability I fall into a group called top tier, 17% exurbanite, 13% savvy suburbanites. As I look at the 39% and read the description, it says, we've achieved our corporate and career goals and now can either consult or operate our own business. So far, pretty accurate. We're married couples with older children. Yes, true. Every home maintenance chore in our lavish homes is handled by a variety of contractor services. Well, I wouldn't describe my home as lavish. It's more modern. And while I do think of myself as handy, the reality is I'm not around enough to finish a lot of the projects I start or get them done. So yeah, a lot of this is true. Some of it's not completely accurate for me. As it goes on to read the description, talks about classic music and operas and charity dinners. Opera, no. Classic music, no, not at least in a decade, but charity dinners, absolutely a mainstay of my life. I was born poor and feel a very strong commitment to giving back to the community, particularly around education and so forth, so that's a big part of it. And as you go through these descriptions, this is one out of over 200 different data sources. And when you begin to surround that data about me as a person or you or any of our customers, we do begin to get a more holistic, complete view of who we are, what's important to us, and therefore what type of marketing messaging may be appropriate. Looking at the geolocation data further, this shows in the center LAX, the Hertz rental car, the drive up to our customer Amgen in the north. And when we combine that data with the TAB data that comes in the platform that tells us where every single out-of-home billboard is located down to the individual ID, you can detect the speed at which I'm passing these billboards and which ones I'm passing in the direction where I can actually see the message in the ad. We can look at geolocation data of where I live and why it is that my wife ends up shopping more at Walmart than Target, even though she attitudinally seems to have more of an affinity toward Target. It's almost entirely explained by convenience. You can see Target's further away from where we live, and her commute pattern's about 15 minutes to Walmart and more like 20, 25 to Target. Interestingly enough, the Whole Foods is near Target, and she does shop there more often. So there's also this measure of how far are people willing to go, where else can they get that item. And I think we begin to understand a deeper sense of what brand loyalty is really about when we begin to combine these data sources together to get a more holistic view. So what I just took you through fairly quickly is a very fast view of different data sources, how information comes together, how it connects back to an individual. We take all these different layers of information and data and combine that back together. What we have is a database of over 100 trillion data points, tens of thousands of data points on each consumer from hundreds and hundreds of different sources. And really the flexibility to add all kinds of new data as it becomes available. And that is fundamentally changing marketing in a major way. So as we think about this data and move on to topic number 3, how marketers should use the graph schema, we see 4 things as really interesting. First is better marketing relevance. I mean, this is a great opportunity to really think about optimizing the experience for our customers. When someone's a prospect and they've converted in buying, to begin to stop chasing them with the same message in the ad, and now begin talking to them about deepening the relationship and so forth. Second topic, waste reduction. I mean, the ability to reduce or eliminate impressions and wasted discounts because the person would have bought at full price or with less of a discount, or I didn't need to deliver that message to that person because they were never going to buy anyway, but it's such a low probability of buying. Or I know that I already delivered 10 messages to them over the last 2 months in these other media. I don't need to deliver the 11th or 12th message in this media, and managing that frequency and so forth. These are things that, as we have a device graph that's integrated and connected back to that person, this is incredibly useful and powerful ways of increasing return on investment. Third is better intelligence in business planning, the ability to take a segmentation or personas that you have and say, well, actually, let's map these to real people. Let's find out where they are. Let's score households or individuals and really think about where our customers are going to come from. And then finally, financial and business analysis. A lot of times the planning happens top-down. Build it up, bottom up from the people with the propensity scoring and see how realistic it is to actually get to that goal, that number, or what you'd need to achieve in terms of increasing the customer penetration or getting more purchases out of existing customers to meet your financial plans. Those are things that we can do with the graph schema that were never as easy to do before we had this amount of data and information available to us. So I'll unpack a couple more of what can be done, talking about this idea, the first one about building marketing relevance, and I'll provide some really quick just case examples, and then go into a live one in a bit. This example here is about increasing the number of sources where we can get data directly from the ad delivery partners. So in the mobile area, we found the ability to connect device IDs to people and then look at the exposure across different devices so we can manage frequency better. And that has certainly led to reductions in waste. It's also led to identifying very important patterns about who you want to deliver the message to create greater impact. So this example here, this is a real-world case where we are looking at the effectiveness of mobile advertising. And what we did was we looked at different frequency, which you see at the bottom of the chart here, listed from 0 to 10. And then we looked at the impact on the key performance indicators. You can think of this like sales or brand perception and so on. And we looked at individual people, and we fit the pattern to say, okay, well, as people were exposed to more advertising, we saw that, in fact, that it increased the key performance indicator, and we could calculate the return on investment accordingly. But very importantly, we were also able to say, well, let's look at some of the different data in the graph schema and begin to see, well, if there were differences in how some people were influenced by the message. Was the message more effective and had better ROI for men versus women? Actually, there's a 70% difference between men and women for this ad. Was there a difference between where people lived or the time of day the message was delivered, or what the weather was doing at the time, or what type of interest they have in Facebook, or, and you can go on and on with all kinds of different variables that exist within that graph schema to try to find those patterns and those commonalities. And that's what this heat map over here is. Each of these columns is a different message with all the different profile variables that were found to be differentiating. And this information can be directly used then to select media and message matching to increase marketing ROI. Now, one tip we suggest here that's very important when you begin to get more in this world of highly targeted messaging and marketing is to make sure that you use a control group and to look at different exposure levels across that control group and make sure that in fact what we're seeing is the effect of advertising as opposed to just the fact that certain people are much more likely to buy the product, and simply putting the message in front of them isn't ROI, that's really a targeting artifact. The best example that I've ever heard of that was one that Jim Spaeth shared with me when he was head of the ARF some time ago, where he talked about how Kraft had thought they discovered that that certain of their TV ads were working really, really well to get people to buy more Oreos. But in fact, what they found was that the people that were more likely to be sitting in front of the TV, consuming more of the commercials, were people who were in larger households, and those larger households were more likely to consume more of everything. And so, you know, you need to have a control group before you saw whether or not that ad actually changed people's sales patterns. But this is, you know, this is one application of it. You know, same thing. You know, that was a deterministic example. And when you go to some media like digital, the deterministic graphs are actually pretty good. And there's a lot of ways that we can integrate with different graphs and different media providers that will provide their device graph to help manage messaging and create that better marketing experience. When you go into television, we shift into a, you know, there are some deterministic TV graphs that exist. Those exist you know, related to addressable television. People like Dish and so forth offer the ability to do addressable television, some of the cable companies and so on. But a lot of it ends up being a probabilistic delivery. And so the way that that works, just to demonstrate how marketers use the graph schema, is we at Marketing Evolution use Nielsen RenTrack as source data. We have a proprietary classification model to assign frequency. We have a holdout group to confirm the precision. And similarly to what you saw with the deterministic one, we'll look at frequency, and then we'll fit a curve to find patterns to improve effectiveness. And similarly, you know, one of the great things to do with a control group is you can buy some addressable TV and go expose control so you can really confirm the patterns as well. Or you can apply sensitivity testing with the holdout group to see, well, if we were off by a frequency or two for different people, how much of a difference does that make to our recommendation? And that's a great way of, again, figuring out which messages in television are working best among which people, so you can adjust your creative rotation. You can adjust your media mix to get, you know, 10 to 20% higher productivity out of each dollar you're spending. It's phenomenal with the targeting also, because you can take a targeting insight, you know, that's really robust, and maybe, you know, people who like something in social media, and because you can cross the graph, you can say, well, I know this person likes these things on Facebook, and they're our perfect audience, perfect customer. We're incredibly relevant to them, and now we can take that and find out, well, what do they watch in greater concentrations on television? And then we can measure whether or not, in fact, the TV ad is also influencing their future behaviors. So just to get a little bit deeper into how that works, this is some of RenTrack source data, for example, that gets down into the LA area looking at, this is primetime ABC television. And you can see that the viewership of this is quite different in different areas. And so based on where you live, you will get a different probability of exposure based on whether you are employed full-time or not, whether or not, you know, you're male or female, you're younger or older, all the different characteristics that are differentiating in terms of who's watching what. That's what's being used for that probabilistic calculation. So you know, I'll come back to the example that we were talking about before of my own personal data. And my commute pattern we talked about between Walmart and Target, but you can take this from one person's experience and you can turn that into a score for every single person in the country. So this is an example of the Pizza Convenience Index, and it calculates for every single person what the closest chain is if someone were to drive to go buy their pizza. Now, of course, with a mobile phone or with digital, that changes that geographic battleground, and we'll get into, you know, talk about some of the new media in other discussions we have. But this one, from a retailer competitiveness standpoint, is an example of what we would call scaled personalization. We've taken each of that personal data, their commute patterns, what's more convenient, and why. We've scaled that up across every single person, and we've calculated, you know, down at a pretty granular level, you know, what the competitive battleground looks like. This is an example of the work that we did in retail with geofencing, where we found certain clusters of customers that were perfect for this product. And you can see that in the green highlighted area. And then we found the closest out-of-home billboards, which are the blue squares. And we also found the geo buffer that we would want to set if we were turning on mobile geofencing advertising. And so, customers that were more likely to work or live or commute around in this area would be more likely to get the advertisements with a high concentration of messaging going to people that were the most likely to convert in a profitable way. And that's driven by the platform today. And it was driven by some insights that we had for some of the research that we did with Walmart, where we looked at geolocation data, and we said, okay, you could target someone in their home. That's what they would call audience targeting over here, that had been in the store before based upon that data. And if we showed them this small ad, would that cause them to increase their visitation rate to Walmart? And so we had a control group to compare that, and what we saw was no. In fact, that small ad would not get them to leave their home and come to the store at a higher rate than what they would have done otherwise. However, when we showed that large ad to the same people, we did see a lift. And when we showed that small ad to people who were within that geo-buffer proximity of the store, we did see, in fact, that also increased their foot traffic in the store. And of course, what we found was the best combination was the large ad with the map, showing them how close they were, how many miles away, and that caused the greatest impact on store traffic. So that data linked into our platform that's calculating for each consumer and each person is a great example of multiple different data sources coming together in a very practical way to help marketers create benefit. And more than just foot traffic, we ultimately linked in with Walmart's 83 million plus, or whatever the final number is, a database of total customers, and performed the analysis on whether or not, in fact, it shifted sales. And as they reported, from a cost efficiency of the actual cash register ringing, that mobile ad that we were just talking about was among the most efficient. But we were also able to compare that to the television, digital, and FSI to look at how those converted, because again, each of those could be attached back to that person in the social graph. So a very practical example of how using all these combinations of data can really understand truly the consumer journey as they drove by the store, as they walked into the store, as they walked to the cash register and bought something, and for us to get a complete view of advertising's effect on that, down to which messages were most influential in driving that behavior. So we've talked about better marketing relevance. We've talked about waste reduction, which I think you can imply from making sure we were avoiding delivering messages to the wrong people, or over-delivering messages, which is probably the most common way in which waste accumulates. What I want to talk about next is, you talked a little bit about business planning. Is I want to share a case study with you that will bring together these in another example. So we'll talk a bit about how you can take the segmentation and look at the people-based piece and really link that into your overall advertising effectiveness view using the graph schema. Now this case study that I'm going to share just won the Big Data Award from the ARF, and it was for our work with Warner Brothers. And what I'll show you first is these are all the theater locations showing up in the map here, and we have other variables like who are the most likely moviegoers. We can look at things like different segments of people who liked Michael B. Jordan or Sylvester Stallone or Rocky fans according to their Facebook data. We can look at the geofencing of around the theaters. We can also look at current weather patterns. So there's a lot of data that's automatically being processed by the algorithm as it comes up and identifies that there's about a 24% upside in optimization based on all these different data pieces coming together at that personal level. Now, what that personal data looks like, just to give you a view of it, is in our platform we have a double opt-in proprietary set of data for which we're doing survey data, and we're getting people's permission to link to their social media data, and to use that as to shift from personas to actual understanding who consumers were and what messages is right for them. So what the algorithms looked at is looking at all the social data. Within social data, we have the likes and the categories. We can look within the categories and so forth, and the algorithms are finding, based on this consumer, this is the best message for this person, and then it can explain a bit about why that message. Now I'll shift to another person. For this person, it's a different message, different set of social data and interests and so on, and on. So this is the beginning of really, when you think about personalization, getting the right message to the right person, buying the right type of Facebook targets in a very specific categories. It's taking this group of people that have agreed for us to be able to look at that data at that level of depth and detail, and then it's scaling that data up into lookalike models that basically say, okay, well, for these different messages, here is the profile of the people for whom this message is actually perfectly tuned to it. And you can see there's a difference here between the college-educated or not, and the fan data and what type of digital purchases they've made. If I look at this other message like Destiny Ray, that's a very different profile of consumer. It's the only one that is really working with the female population. And we can look at the creative content and begin to get insights about, well, what is it about that message that's connecting more with women than the other messages? And having looked at that question, I can tell you it's much more focused on the relationship between Michael B. Jordan's character and his girlfriend and his mother than the other messages. And so that might give us an insight to say, okay, I can see who this is connecting to. If I want to connect with that, expand my appeal, these are some of the cues or things that might be working. Or I can decide to do A/B tests and try different messages in different ways and see if I can pull in or draw in different audiences or groups. So so this is a quick illustration of how we can go from individual data to lookalike model profile data, and then ultimately what all that data comes together and says, okay, well, overall these are the strongest performing messages. So that the come out that we were looking at here just a second ago is that second one that's blinking there. And I can, that will then generate an optimized media plan that tells me to allocate my budget. I can get that 24% better results. And here's exactly how I would be spending the money down to the individual. And even within the TV network and program level, it will give me the optimized creative rotation that matches the composition of each of those channels, because again, that's another data set that's connected into the graph schema from the Nielsen data and Rentrack data that's giving us the profiles of who's watching what programs, when, and where. So I know I've gone through this somewhat quickly, and it's just scratching the surface on the on what's possible with the framework. But I wanted to give you a sense of with another case study of what happens with all of this type of data coming together. Overall, the upside of 24% is very typical in the range of what we're seeing, and this is why we think that this new availability of this type of data, the new ways of analyzing the data, is such a big competitive differentiator, because the companies that are applying it will basically outpace the competitors, because they'll get about 20–30% better productivity on every dollar they're spending, and they will be able to pinpoint and take away customers from the competitors that are not moving as quickly or not looking at data in the same level of depth and detail. So quick recap, what you saw in that demonstration was multiple messages and their impact. You saw the best audience heat map. You saw the individual next best message for individual people, which in turn pushes out programmatic recommendations in the digital environment. It also pushes out media mix changes in offline media such as television, and it sorts out the optimal message weight and rotation, and moves around the media mix to get the best business results. And then all of that is being fueled by the integration of, as you saw really in that heat map, demographics, location, neighborhood, Facebook data, digital profile data, all these different sources coming together, thousands of data points being evaluated to figure out which ones are most useful in optimizing message targeting and media mix decisions. So with that, I will shift to topic number 5, is what do you need to ask partners and vendors? And then we'll open it up for some questions. So the question that we would suggest looking at media partners is we've been incredibly fortunate to have been selected by Time Inc. And some other media partners to help work with them with their data and integrate and measure ROI. And what I've discovered in that process is, man, media partners, there's been this very walled division between, in the old days where marketers didn't talk to media partners, agencies did. And we see that breaking down a lot where there's much more direct relationships, and a lot of it has to do with data, the ability to share data, develop programs that are more attuned to creating relevant messages for the right people. And I think a lot of it is around this ability to combine data and combine graphs. So look at what data they have to bring to the table. Look at what onboarding with an analytics partner like Marketing Evolution looks like, so that that data is actually being analyzed and made sure that we're looking using things like control groups and really getting a true read on the incremental value. Take a close look at the graph overlay, which is, okay, if we already have a lot of data on people, if we want to use that with yours, so that we are combining information, and what's the best way of doing that? Oftentimes, Marketing Evolution works as an independent third party that will take both of those data together, combine them, but we'd make sure that the media owner's data stays in their database ultimately, and the marketer's database stays in their database, but we're able to combine and create that second-party data that can be used for those programs in an efficient way. The other thing I would really look at is truly when all of them are going to quote these great numbers of how much better using their data your marketing programs will be. What we have found is that in some cases it is an artifact. It's back to that Oreo example. It's an artifact to getting the message in front of people who are going to buy anyway. So the real question is, okay, great, you've got great data, you've got great information. Make sure that we are using proper control groups and lift analytics to ensure that we've got the right message in front of the right people to be motivating and truly creating new value. And then fifth point, the point that we're thinking about here is how the individual level data will be exchanged for targeting the impression delivery. And we use people like LiveRamp or Newstar, and there's others out there as well. But there's different ways of doing PII protected data for that information to flow back and forth. The lookalike modeling that you saw there, part of that was to deal with the PII and creating small, tight clusters of profile variables that will get it in front of the right people, but in a way that's PII compliant. And then sixth is always ask for data played back at a unique frequency. And this is a really interesting one about reducing waste. In fairness to media owners, their motivations are a bit different from a marketer's motivations, and so what sometimes happens is that the media owner has a limited footprint, and in order to be able to get, because people are still looking at CPMs instead of cost per impact, which is what we would suggest using instead, there can be a tendency to try to sell more impressions, but if that's at the cost of a lot of, more frequency than you need, it's really not good for the consumer. It's not good for the marketer. It's actually, in the long run, it's not great for the media company either. And so this is, it's worth actually focusing more on impact than on impressions, and trying to make sure that you're managing or frequency capping, so you're not over-delivering a messaging. So these are, if you guys have other suggestions or things you think we ought to add to the list, this is a growing and evolving list. We're certainly open to your suggestions and thoughts. I'll jump to the next one here, which is what to ask some of the different data vendors. and I'll show you a couple examples of what to look like, what should look like in terms of the answers you should get back. Number one is check the license data for use in many platforms. What's happened with some of these data is that the agencies bought it, but on behalf of the marketer, but then that it doesn't always get released to be able to be used or shared with analytic vendors and partners. So we've actually had people rewrite, things like some of the different data partnerships to make sure that the marketer's licensed it and they have the right to sub-license it, provide their license to an analytic partner and the agency, or we've licensed it directly and we've built in the rights to be able to share that with the marketer and the agency. So it's important to understand exactly what you're paying for, what restrictions are on the data. Second one is understand which of the data is deterministic and what's probabilistic. And even if it's deterministic, don't assume that's perfectly data. I showed you some of my deterministic data from my iPad, which did not capture the full view of all of my travel and movement and behavior data. It was good data, it was useful data, but it's not perfect. So really think through what is that data measuring, what is it missing. If you do have a probabilistic model, look at the holdout group and the ability to have companies like Marketing Evolution ground truth the data to check it. We've actually done that since the entire history of the company, starting with ground truthing originally the digital targeting data for companies like P&G, and now today we're doing that increasingly just as part of the onboarding checklist. Third is integration. You want to find partners that will make it easy to combine graphs, easy to combine data and information, and you may find that some of the data they have isn't perfectly representative. It might be a subset of different data. That might be okay. You just know what the limitations are, and ask how they handle device identification, and if you want to join information together, how that integration is going to work. Easiest way of doing it based upon device identification, but some of them hash and convert that into another form and structure, and that can be a little bit of a problem. Ask about the practical application of privacy and aggregation. We have two different ways that we oftentimes will aggregate data for privacy, and you saw the individual level data where that was double opted in. We then take that data and we can combine it based upon all the different profile variables to find the closest lookalike or classification model that says just to be able to score people. Another way of aggregating is using the US grid. What that basically does is it takes, like in a neighborhood, it would combine 50 or so people together so that you really have average data. And if the dimension of the data you're looking at, that birds of a feather flock together, then that geographical way of aggregation is just fine. For some other types of data, aggregating in a more flexible, dynamic way is our preference. And then finally, we would ask them to see the ETL. ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. Ask to see how exactly the data flows through their system, how often it gets refreshed, what happens when you have multiple data points on the same person that are in conflict. Those would be some common things that we oftentimes are looking for when we're bringing data into our platform. So we've integrated over 200 different data sources, so if you'd like our help, we're happy to support the success of connecting marketers, data vendors, and media partners. And we've actually built out a data partner an alliance program just around this area just to make this an easier and faster way of onboarding more and more data. This is an example. I mentioned I'd give you an example of when you ask for like ETL or showing the data scheme or how all the data information flows together. This is the example that we have. You'd want to see something like this. It's showing the actual data, the flow of information, the conversions, the analytics it's providing underneath it. So we think something like this would be useful. And finally, if you'd like to go deeper in any of these conversations, let me just give you some additional resources. First is we're doing a customer roundtable on May 19th in New York. It's close to being all sold out, but if you've got some strong interest in these topics, several of these will be covered. The theme is around scaled personalization, so it's really more the practical application of all these graph schema ideas. There's also a short 2-page article I wrote for Research World called Real-Time Marketing Management is Here. It was very much about deterministic and probabilistic data matching and how that works. There's a longer white paper on probabilistic and deterministic media analysis. We're happy to do an ROI Brain deep dive. If that chart I just showed briefly, you want to get deeper into it and understand how all the data and systems flow through, how data becomes decisions and ultimately profits. Happy to do that. And of course, we have our on-site executive briefing and demo series that we can set up for more one-on-one or personal. So with that, I will turn it back to Kristen for some Q&A.
Thank you, Rex. I just have one correction. The roundtable is May 18th for anyone who is interested in attending.
Well, that's probably good for me to get the date right then.
But we will go ahead and take some time for questions now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Teddy asks, what graph database are you using in general for combining databases, and are there any limitations?
Yeah, that probably, well, what I'll do is I'll just show you where we have that info. Cassandra is probably the name that you're looking for in that question. And I mentioned before that we have the Marketing Evolution, the ROI Brain deep dive piece that we can take people through. This has our full list of the different technologies. So you can see there's a lot of different elements that are coming together here, but specifically your question about that piece is listed here. So you're looking at the graph schema. It's a Lambda architecture with Hadoop and NoSQL, and Cassandra as the key stack pieces elements here. Next question?
Sure. Teddy also asks, what was the largest data set you used in the graph database?
The location data is by far the one spitting out the most data points. And that probably is the one that's probably, in my view, the biggest one that's will be an ongoing work in progress, which is the data reduction and what's the right ways of characterizing it. So when we were looking at some of the different, well, actually, I'll just stick with this piece here and just go into a map and just show you a few of the different pieces. So you've got, when we looked at location information, the most intense part of the data is when we get down to the U.S. grid, which is 100 meter by 100 meter. So if I look at location points for Arby's, for example, and I zoom into New York, the data gets pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. So clicking on the 100 meter by 100 meter grid here, basically you begin to get these clusters of information down to a very fine detail. So yeah, I mean, location. The short answer is the location information by far of where people are traveling and how they're moving is the biggest data set. The other part, which is really the fact that we're mapping to every single person in the country, the attachments of the data, like social media and some of the other parts, also spin off a ton of information and data. We're dealing more with the structured data today, but really, when you think about the graph schema, the ability to take in unstructured data, for example, with Twitter handles and so forth, we have all the different things people have typed or said, and to be able to apply analysis to that is that would probably be the second largest data set that you can go streaming in potentially. Any other questions?
Rebecca asks, does this type of analysis based on individual data replace traditional marketing mix modeling?
Yeah, I think what you'll see is over time it absolutely will, because if we look back at say, we were looking at this example here with the Warner Brothers case, and when we think about their map or information, you might say something like, well, we do know that weather has an effect on people coming out to seeing a movie. And right now that would be just handled as normally as a broad regional piece of information. But when you can begin to look at this data down to more like individual theaters and individual people who are likely to convert an individual theater. So if I go into Salt Lake right now and say, okay, well, the weather's not so great right here, should we dynamically, first of all, we can dynamically calculate the effect of weather on sales, but we can do that at a personal level. We can also begin to dynamically change our marketing to say, okay, well, we're going to spend less, we're going to lean into the areas where we know we have a higher conversion from sales. So I think that you end up getting all the benefits of a marketing mix model with greater flexibility and more real-time, real-time action from it. Now, having said that, the other way of using this data is you can look at, for marketing evolution, there are some cases where a marketer is has a very entrenched mixed model process and system, and so they'd much rather use all this data in the graph schema to just do creative rotation and media mix optimization. And so what ultimately comes out of the data ends up being this, advertising productivity number, which goes in to the mixed model and makes the mixed model more accurate. So yes, I think over time you will see these replace mixed models, but there's a happy medium for those people who want the power of choice and would like to keep their mixed model, but want to take advantage of more of this more real-time data. Basically, this then feeds the creative weight factor that the mixed model uses.
Great, thank you. A few more questions. Have you done any graph database with digital or linear media data? And if so, what data sources?
Yeah, the linear media, the best example of that is television. And combining the RenTrack data with the ROV data set has been very intriguing to me, because the thought that we had is that the way that we've typically looked at analyzing television is to analyze it based on program and day part level, and network and cable and syndications, and these distinctions that I'm not sure make sense to consumers. If they're watching a program, it's because they want to be watching it. Now, there might be a difference between seeing a first-run program versus a rerun. There might be a difference between the different traits of a program, whether it's drama or comedy, and the genres and so on. And so what we've been very intrigued about is when you combine the ROV data set, which has a lot of trait characteristics, to the TV program, and you feed that back into the same model, what ends up happening when we were looking at the individual creative response is those traits become another line item here, and you begin to see whether certain messages work better in certain types of television, based on those traits. And you can do the same thing. We've been doing the same thing with the creative message itself, where we've coded the messages as being, whether it's humorous or not, and whether it has a celebrity in it or not. And so those would be examples of combining with linear or television specifically, and using different graphs and types of data to find deeper patterns. So I know we're at the top of the hour. I know I didn't get to all the questions. What we'll do is I'll follow up with Kristen to find out any other ones that we want to follow up with, or if you have some interest in diving into a more personal discussion or more of an on-site type of demo and so forth, that's what we're here for. And of course, if you are a customer of ours and you want to do a lunch and learn and get deeper into some of this, we're happy to do that as well. And we'll make the recording to this presentation available to all of you that have registered. Thank you very much for joining us. Back to you, Kristen, to wrap us up.
Great, thank you, Rex. We appreciate you all being here, and we hope to see you next time.